Hi, and welcome to another episode of Canadianish Comedians. I'm Laura Toogood.
And I'm Julie Betts.
Today our guest is Joanne O'Sullivan. Hey, Joanne.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So glad you made it. So a little bio about Joanne. You have worked in the live Canadian art scene for over 20 years across many genres, including performing stand-up everywhere from Vancouver to Toronto. You've written and performed in 3 solo shows, and your third, She Grew Funny, premiered to sold-out audiences at the Toronto Fringe Festival, where it was the Factory Theatre Studio Patrons' pick and one of Now Magazine's outstanding new plays. I thought I was gonna trip up on Patrons' pick because it's
Baker's pick.
As a screenwriter, your credits include writing for CBC's popular news parody show, This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and as a contributing writer for the Baroness Von sketch show.
One of my faves.
Yes.
It's a good one.
Your podcast, Happy, Funny, Amazing, where guests tell... Your podcast, Happy, Funny, Amazing, where guests tell you their funniest and happiest, most amazing true stories, recently recorded 3 episodes live in front of an audience as part of the 2022 Meighen Forum, the Stratford Festival.
Meighen Forum at the Stratford.
At the Stratford.
That's my typo. Anybody listening, that's her reading my bio, and that's my typo. That's tripping.
You know what? And I do copy. I kind of do copywriting for a living, so you think I would have previewed that and edited it and blah,
and
blah,
we both
blah.
went through it before this. Yeah, right.
We are so professional. Anyhow, welcome,
so
Joanne. After all that, welcome,
Thank
Joanne.
you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. It's so nice to have you be with us. So some people may not be familiar with your Fringe show, She Grew Funny. What can you tell us about your journey into becoming a comedian and how it all...
She Grew Funny kind of, there's 2 answers to that question. That's sort of the technical, just like how did I become a comedian? Was I actually went to theater school, but when I graduated from University of Windsor theater program. I started with a friend, a theater company that did improv-based theater. But it was not funny. It was I think my strength has always been narrative and story structure. So I did that for a while, but then that sort of led me eventually to take a class at Second City. We did well. We had a few shows that we did, and it was fun. But then I decided to expand sort of my improv repertoire, and I went to Second City. And I started doing an improv comedy show called Theater Sports.
Oh, yeah.
Albert
We're
Howell
familiar with
was
that.
my first teacher, and he was amazing and still a dear friend. And so I started doing theater sports, and still if you wanted the sort of the beginning and the end of the scene, you would bring me in. I was never a wacky character kind of improviser. It wasn't my strength, but liked the wordplay and liked the fun of it. And like the comedy of it, realized I really liked making people laugh, which people who knew me in high school, I was shy, in university, I was a pretty good actor, but I was shy. So I think those people, to find out that I eventually drifted into comedy, are probably pretty surprised. Not people argued with me, though, because I've always liked a good debate, good with words, always been a writer. So then one day, I just thought, I'm going to try stand-up and better stand-up than I was an improviser. And then that just sort of took off for me. And I did that for quite some time until I transitioned into television writing, which, at the time paid more. And I didn't have to tour around so much. And, then I had a daughter, which kept me home and kept me writing in more of a personal way. But lately I've been trying to go back into stand-up comedy. So,
that's great.
But that was the technical way. But you also asked about She Grew Funny, but I'll pause there and see if you have another question.
Well, basically, I guess how that, how did that transition, how was that transition for you, like returning to stand up after taking that time off to be a mom and writing, for the TV?
So I actually documented that. So I have another podcast that's still up. It's just 25 episodes long, and it's called Just for Once. And so when I left stand-up, I was a pretty strong middle. And what that means is I was beyond opening, but I wasn't really at the level of being sort of the closer yet. But I was doing casinos. I was doing like I was a strong middle. I had a pretty good 20 minutes or so.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. I was pretty good, and I was working my way up, but I never did Just for Laughs, which had always been a bit of a dream for me. So I decided to try to go back into stand-up when my daughter was about, I'm going to say she's 13 now. So it was about when she was 10. It was right before the pandemic ended this podcast. But so it was right before the pandemic. And I decided to go out and try stand-up again, 15 years later.
Wow.
And I had a podcast called Just for Once. And I guess my super witty play on words was just for once, I'm going to try to get to the level where I can get into Just for Laughs.
Yeah.
And so I took out all my old material. And what people liked about this podcast, at least the feedback I got, is that I would kind of at home, I'd say, I'm going to try this joke. And then I would let them hear me. I'd record the set. And then I would let them hear if I failed. And if I bombed, I played it. Or if I did well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then sometimes I did well, sometimes I didn't. And then I started building my set again. And it was interesting as an older woman coming back into, I was suddenly the creepy older woman sitting at the back of the stand-up room and with all the younger comics and
Somebody's
stuff.
mom.
And it was sometimes fun because the times that I did well, like the times where I could just find my spot, when you're in your pocket,
The zone.
Yeah. So the moments where I would get up and, 10 years of stand-up, it's like getting on a bike again. Like I'd done it a lot. Like I was doing 3 or 4, sometimes 5 shows a night back when I was really doing it. So sometimes you can just land right back in that pocket. But nobody knew me. And so it was always a fun surprise to see people go thinking that I was new, here's a mom trying stand-up, but then just killing. And then the flip side, sometimes I would get up and they'd be like, oh yeah, she is new.
Oh no.
Oh.
But that's okay. That's the process. It wasn't painful. It's like you get to my age and it's like people don't laugh. You go home, you watch TV and they go to bed.
Yeah.
It doesn't really stay with you very long.
So just for once, that was done. You were trying out new material through that venue, let's say, like your own personal thing. So that's sort of a way that you stayed connected to that whole scene then.
Yeah, well, I kind of reintroduced myself into that old scene through the podcast, and it's also the way I taught myself podcasting. Like the flip side of me doing that was I wanted to learn podcasting. I wanted to learn how to sound mix. I just thought it's such a great new a medium to get into, especially for somebody like me. So it was a real vehicle for me just to learn the medium as well and to get into the podcasting business. So it was super fun. And I'm just now starting to think about going out and maybe not continuing the podcast so much, but just continuing that journey of getting back into stand-up. It is when I'm good, when I'm at my best, it is my best skill. And it is the thing I love most.
That's amazing. It's so hard to do stand-up. I know I've said it many times during the podcast that anybody that does stand-up, I'm like, good for you. It's so hard.
It's
and I don't
so fun though, when it's right and when it's good, it's just, there's nothing better. It's so fun.
Yeah. It's like a drug, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're hitting it and people are laughing and you're like, I'm making all these people laugh. It is adrenaline and all the rest of endorphins and all those good feeling things. But then when you crash, it's like,
yeah. I mean, it sucks in the moment, but to anybody thinking about doing it, I would say it's not that. I mean, nobody likes to crash on stage. Like nobody wants to, but you just bounce right back. Yeah. It's like anything, it's not as excruciating as you would think.
Yeah.
And it gives the other comics at the back of the room something to laugh at. If only for the other comics' amusement.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's something. You've given somebody something fun.
Yeah.
Is there a type of material that you struggle performing?
A type that I struggle performing.
Yeah.
I do long form, mostly stand up, which is storytelling. So I usually tell true stories from my life. So I guess the kind of I'm trying to think of what it's called, like just like set up punchline. So I don't, but then when I was on 22 Minutes, that's what I wrote. So like, you know, we would write, we call them copy jokes, which are those today in the news, blah, 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 punchlines. So
yeah,
I can write that, but it's certainly not my sweet spot to perform at all. I think that's a certain kind of personality that can do that kind of really fast, quick, where I'm way better at giving myself space to tell a longer story, and sometimes dipping into not as funny and then back to funny, and that's sort of where I live.
Yeah, flipping it.
I really appreciate people who can come up with those punchlines like joke. It's a true skill, and it's a great skill. I wouldn't say it's my best skill as a comic.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that writing for 20, this hour has 22 minutes. How did you get into that? Like what propelled you into writing as opposed to doing the stand-up? Like how did you get to that point? Who did you connect with? Like if I were like, okay, I want to start writing for comedy, how would somebody new get into that?
So I started writing for television. I started on a show called Smart Woman's Survival Guide. And it's a sitcom that also was, it gave you tips on how to, like, there'd be like a scene and somebody would spill ketchup on their shirt and then they'd go direct to camera. If you need to get ketchup out of your shirt, then you need to do, we're talking like, this is like 15 years ago or so. And that's when I was doing stand-up. And I had a friend that I worked with whose wife worked on that show, and I knew they were hiring. So I invited her out to see my stand-up. And then she invited me in with the production company to interview, and they hired me. And because my comedy was storytelling and really female-driven storytelling, this was a show for a female-driven show, they thought I'd be a good match to help them punch up the scripts. So at first I was hired to punch up, which is just write jokes. And then they told me, asked me if I wanted to write a script. So, and through that process, I learned to write for television. I will say I was also hired as the show's story coordinator. And so which was, I was working about 16 hours a day at that job. I'm not joking. Like when they were in production, and I was getting paid about, well, I won't even say, but not a lot. And I don't think people should get underpaid, but I will say you do have to be willing to do anything in a production company or on a show, like be a PA or be the coordinator or whatever, be an assistant to the executive producer. Those are the kind of jobs that beget jobs. So that's how I started.
That's great advice.
By the second season, I was a writer on the show. And in terms of 22 Minutes, I applied. So they did a call for writers. Albert Howell was a writer on the show. He might have been the head writer. I can't remember. Oh no, Jennifer Whalen, who was one of the Baronesses, was the head writer at that point. When I came in, Albert was a writer, and he let me know. He told me they were looking for, so he emailed me to say they're looking. So I sent in my package. Mark Farrell was the showrunner at that time, and he hired me. And then they hire you for 2 weeks. So you do 2 weeks, and it's like it's like Hunger Games. Like you got to get someone on the show. Like I'm not joking.
Yeah.
Like, you get 2 weeks, and if you don't create, produce, then you're gone. So I got 2 weeks. I got 2 weeks. I got 2 weeks. Then I got a year.
Wow.
So that's how that happened. And then I got pregnant.
Oh.
And that's how that ended.
Oh no.
Aw.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. You know what? I really wanted a baby. So
Aw.
Yeah.
I'm okay with
yeah.
how that went.
Yeah.
It's definitely worthwhile having kids, I think.
Yeah.
Most days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I understand that you typically don't talk about your family in your comedy, but how do they feel about you being a comedian?
Oh, they love it. And I will say, like, she grew funny. My solo show is about my family.
Okay.
But you're right. Like I never, like, my stand-up didn't really like my extended, like my parents, I didn't, but I would talk about my family, like my poor husband, and on some level, my daughter, now that I've started out again. But they love it. Like they just think that it's fun, and happy to hear that I might be getting back into it. I will say, since you bring it up, my father wants me to do stand-up about him, asked me why I don't do stand-up about him. And he, so on my podcast, so when I was doing Just for Once, I told my listeners, I was like, my dad wants me to do stand-up about my dad. So there's a story that he wanted me to tell, and even a punchline. And so I told that, and I let them hear it on Just for Once. And then I got all these questions about it. It's a crazy story, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, because maybe it'll make people go listen to it.
Exactly.
If
Yes,
you listen
and
to
can
it
I-
on if you listen to it on just the original story, if you listen to it on Just for Once, it's called the bonus summer episode.
Okay.
But then I got so many questions. Like, people had so many follow-up. Like, people could email me when I was doing that to request, like, me try out different premises and whatever. And so I had so many follow-up questions that when I started doing Happy, Funny, Amazing, which is my storytelling podcast, which is people come on. I had my father come on and tell the story. And that's called A Story from Barry O'Sullivan. And that episode is by far my most downloaded episode.
Wow.
It went everywhere. It went everywhere. Like, and my father is so thrilled. And I'm so happy. Like, I have Colin Mockery on it, and he used to be my top downloaded episode. And then my dad came on and just blew him right out of the water. And I told Colin, I was like, you just lost your number one spot to Barry O'Sullivan, my dad. But the story is really worth listening to. Like, if you don't want to go back to Just for Once, that's fine, because you hear the same story on the Happy, Funny, Amazing, but it's called The Story from Barry O'Sullivan, and it's life-changing.
Let me just say this one thing, Joanne. I will never ask your father for his paring knife.
You listen to it.
Loved it. Well, yeah.
And everyone just loved him. Like,
awesome.
Isn't it the best, craziest story ever?
Yes.
I couldn't believe it. I was like, are you kidding me?
It's like, it's really legendary. And I don't know, it just spread. Like, I think people were spreading with their friends and telling people about it. And it's worth a listen.
You have to put it on TikTok. You have to figure out a way to condense it into, like,
I don't do
3 to 5 minutes.
I'm just learning those things. I'm just learning Instagram, for God's sake.
Listen, TikTok, and you can set it up where you can go from TikTok right to your Instagram, right to your Facebook with one download. Like, seriously, get on TikTok. Do it. Do it.
Okay, I'll have to figure. Aren't we being, like, spied on through TikTok? Isn't there something?
Oh, whatever. Aren't we being spied on through everything? It's
like, television.
I know.
Come on.
I'm still living under the delusion that I have any privacy at all on any level.
None. And hopefully, like, there's all that talk about taking down TikTok, which would be horrendous, because it's fun, and I get it. Like,
I have to look at. I'll take a look at TikTok.
I do have to say one other thing about that particular episode, because what triggered me in my head was to ask you did your father ever really believe you were going to go public with it? And then when I listened to that episode, because I heard it the first time, then I heard it the second time in on that episode, and it's like, oh, he asked for it. Oh, I couldn't believe it. No shame. Oh
No
my God.
shame.
It was fantastic. You must get your humor from him then.
Oh yeah, he's a
Yeah.
very funny guy. Always been a quick wit, and yeah.
Maybe deep down inside he wants to do comedy.
He probably should have. Anybody who knows him, well, there would be the people who would say he probably should have, and then people would be say, do not let him anywhere near a microphone.
Yeah, right.
Both sides, that would happen. Yeah.
Maybe if you do like a big special show, have him come on stage.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Barry
This is
O'Sullivan,
Barry.
everyone.
Yeah, special guest appearance. Bye.
That's fantastic.
He's certainly got some fans now. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie.
That's great. Yeah, right. Right.
I love that.
Wow. So you've covered so much.
You're great.
I know. I'm just trying to think of where do we leave off here, Julie, in our
Well, you've written on some of our favorite shows, CBC comedy shows, obviously, and you're currently curating From the Vaults with season 1 already in the can.
Yes.
How did that all come about? What made you do it?
So
What are
From the
some-
Vaults is over now. So it was
Okay.
just a one-off of going into
Okay.
their, so which is great. So, and that was an interesting side trip for me into
Mhm.
documentary writing for CBC. And I have a friend, his name is Ralph Chapman. He's an amazing writer, and he does a lot of writing he's done a lot of like scripted and as
Mhm.
well. But he also is a huge music fan and does some great documentary writing about music. And he was hired to do this show called From the Vaults, which was so fantastic. It was such a thrill. So essentially, the writers got to go into the CBC's vaults from the 1960s through to about, I think we went up to about the 1990s through a production company called Banger Films. And we would find the best Canadian moments in music history. And we would write 10-minute documentaries based on the footage that we found.
Very
And
cool.
I guess so Ralph and I just go way back. When I said that I came out of university and I had a theater company that did shows based on improvising, Ralph directed it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he directed it. And so we've just known each other forever. Teresa Pavlinik co-directed it as well. And then they went on to do the Jane Show. So they created their own
very
show.
cool.
I think I'm getting that name right. Anyway, he asked me to come in and interview for that show. So I did. And I'm a big music fan, very new to doc writing though. And so I really appreciate it. I learned a lot on that show. But yeah, so it was super fun. Like we did Bryan Adams, I wrote Leonard Cohen. There's all sorts of footage that we got to watch, and it was super fun. Not funny though. But
It's okay.
But, yeah,
No,
yeah.
but it was sort of crazy to watch because there's so much of that throwback to when I was growing up. And I mean, we didn't get a color television in our house until 1980, if you can believe it.
Yeah.
So any of that black and white footage was my reality. I mean, anyway, I just, it was amazing to see like the one of the episodes, the kids are all right, because I had to necessarily.
Oh, you watched it? Yeah, it's
I had to watch that one because I'm a big Who fan.
Yeah.
But to see Adrian Clarkson and Paul Soles then and now, it was like,
so young.
oh my gosh.
So I got to meet her through doing that, and and she, what a
lovely.
smart, amazing lady, and it was just a real thrill and a real honor. And that show, Take 30. So the show that you're referring to is a show called Take 30, and it used to have all of the It's like an early talk show, right? So it had all these musicians come on, and they would have authors and whatever. It's the very first time Leonard Cohen ever played a song on television anywhere, was on that show, Take
Wow.
30. But there was another woman that is still Adrienne Clarkson's best friend. Her name is Cynthia Scott. And she was the very first woman at CBC to be allowed to be called a producer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they used to call women who were producers at the CBC, I think, show creators or something like that, and only men were producers.
Mhm.
And so Cynthia fought to be called a producer. And really, I bring her up whenever I can because she just laid the groundwork for so many women who came after her. And she went on to be an Oscar-winning filmmaker. And she's just so inspiring and fought so hard. And her and Adrienne created this show that I think literally changed women's lives in Canada. And their whole point was not to make a fluffy show about, how to bake a muffin. Like they brought on authors and writers, and they brought on people who talked about fertility and fertility treatment.
Back then.
Like they really just raised the bar in terms of women's television. And Take 30, to be clear, that title was for the 30 minutes that women are going to take a break between chores.
Mm.
Right? So that's what that show was. And then
Yeah.
these two women got a hold of it, and
That's
just I learned a lot about them and that show, and just how hard they worked and what they created for the rest of us coming up after them.
Wow, that
That's
could be
awesome.
a whole show in itself.
And I pitched it.
Oh, did you? Well, you know what? The climate
a whole
is
other
better.
story.
Pitch it again, girl. Pitch it again. Seriously. And it's kind of what almost inspired us. Well, it did inspire us to get the whole Canadianish Comedians podcast going, was because we started really following the comedy scene in Toronto, because we're from here. And it was like, okay, so let's go see a show. And it'd be like, guy, girl, guy, girl, guy. And it's like, where are all the funny women? There's so many funny women.
Yeah.
And
it was the same 20 years. It gets funny. That part hasn't really changed.
No.
Between me doing it then, me coming back now, it hasn't changed a lot.
I know. So we're trying to advocate to let's get these funny women out there. Let's give some promotion to these people. And anyone that's marginalized in the comedy community, we want to help and just give them that exposure. And it's like,
it's appreciated. It's amazing. Appreciated. I mean, funny need to be celebrated.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And what a great week for that this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's right.
It is. It is. International Women's Day is this week.
I just did a show.
It should be International Women's Week every week.
Month.
Come on. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, you were going to say you just did a show?
No, I was going to say, so something I do I work for a company, a charity called the Shoe Project, which teaches, women, immigrant and refugee women, how to tell their own stories of how they came to Canada. And a lot of, and so all of the videos, so they've been doing this for 10 years. I think it's over 500 women at this point. They've helped. And so a lot of people use those videos on Wednesday, on Women's Day. Often we hear these women's stories, which are terrifying and inspiring and really put in perspective. Just it's crazy what's going on in the world for some women. And everywhere, but in places like Afghanistan right now, where women have completely lost their rights to even leave the house. I literally can't believe.
Sure. Yeah.
And so a lot of the women, so the show was yesterday, and a lot of, I think 4 of the women were from Afghanistan and just got out, and the harrowing tales of what they're going through. And anyway, this is a comedy podcast, but I just think we need to remember those stories, particularly this week, and remember those women.
Absolutely.
The Shoe Project is coming to an end, so that's a really sad thing.
Wow.
Anyway.
Is that because of funding, or?
I think I'm not high enough in an organization to be able to speak to exactly why that's happening, but my guess would be that. Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah.
We should start.
Sorry. Anyway.
That's okay.
Yeah, but there'll be something else. You must have other things on your wish list that you want to do. I mean, okay, it's probably super duper long. But
I love storytelling just in general. So I loved having this opportunity for these women to tell their stories. Happy, Funny, Amazing, my podcast, is on my wish list for that to grow into something bigger and more meaningful. You both know, in the podcasting space, it's not the easiest to figure out how to keep it growing, but I'm really dedicated to, sharing people's stories, and of all sorts of communities, just fun
That's
stories
awesome.
for fun stories' sake, marginalized people's stories to raise profiles and to educate people. I just think it's such a great medium. And so, yeah. And then on the flip side, I really just want to get back into stand up and have some fun telling my own stories, because that's what I love to do as well, with the hopes that, like with the solo shows that I do, autobiographical, and the hope there is always that people see themselves reflected in your stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so where do things stand with you and Just for Laughs?
Well, I stopped doing, so those 25 episodes are quite a great little story on their own now. So it's a thing that I've created. It's still just out in the world. And I think the hope now, so on my final episode, when I had to stop, I made a promise to the listeners that I was going to turn those 25 episodes into a solo show and repackage it, and that I'm still going to try to get to Just for Laughs, and that I would do something with those 25 episodes. Solo shows are sort of my sweet spot. It's what I do well. And so that was the promise I made to my listeners, but that was like 2019. Now it was just before the pandemic. So that's the goal with that. But I have to figure out a way to do that.
That 2021 and 22 don't count, right? Like they're just
right.
like those blip years. So yeah, it's like 2019 was yesterday. So I would just pick up right where you left off and get things rolling.
Yeah, again. I really should. And my daughter's 13 now, so I can get out of the house more. So my husband's an actor. So what happens a lot is he would be out, acting, and I would be home. Because when you're a mom and you try to do stand up and you have to pay for babysitting, you are paying these days $20 an hour to be on stage. I used to have a joke about the audience better be good, because I'm paying to be in front of them. So right. They better make it worth it for me. So, but now that I don't have to pay for babysitting to do stand up, then maybe I'll be able to get out in a more regular kind of way.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
I kind of have I don't know whether it's an offside question or not, but gigs that are free, like you don't get paid, like how do you feel about that?
Well, in stand-up, having open mics is vital. So we need a place to work out our comedy.
True that, yeah.
And it's not always entirely fair to make an audience pay to watch us work out our jokes. So I believe that I'm only talking about stand-up. As a writer, got some real thoughts on being asked to work for free, which I get a lot. But as a stand-up, I think open mics are a very important part of the machine. And we all know that, and we have to go out and do that. That said, the moment that somebody is charging at the door, because open mics usually are free for the audience as well, but the moment that somebody is charging at the door, some of that should come back to the comics. And if a bar is doing an open mic and they went from having 3 people on a Tuesday to 45 people on a Tuesday, and they're getting beer and booze and like they're getting all those sales, then I think there is a I don't know, like back in my day, I worked for beer. So it's hard for me to say I'm newly back in, but like if the bar is like, you know, making $3,000 a night, passing
Oh
some
yeah.
of that back to the comics, I think is important.
Mhm.
Even if it's just in beer or
Or cab fare or
or
something.
cab fare or something. Like I do
Right.
think that's important. At the same time, like I'm only talking at the open mic level.
Mhm, mhm.
At the open mic level, we need those spaces to be bad before
Yeah.
we can get good and be paid. So it's a balance. Like I really think if somebody's making a killing off an open mic and isn't passing something onto the comics, that's pretty shitty. But a lot of like when if you listen to Just for Once, I was doing, you know, some of those open mics to like 7 or 8 people, and I'm just grateful for the
Wow.
5
Yeah.
minutes that I get to try out some new jokes.
Yeah,
So I think it's a real balance. But I think in
Mhm.
most spaces, just to say, don't ask artists to work for free. Like I
Yeah.
think in most spaces, that's ridiculous and
Yeah.
that should never happen. But there's a real benefit that stand-ups get from some of those smaller open mics where they get a chance to work out their stuff.
So what shows do you have coming up?
Oh, I should have thought about the answer to this question. So the shoe project. So I'm mentoring a bunch of immigrant and refugee women for the final shoe project, which is happening at Soul Pepper Theater, and that's on March 25th. Oh, geez,
Cool.
or maybe it's the 26th. I think it's the 26th. It's the Sunday, 2
Yeah,
p.m. at
that's
Soul Pepper, the shoe project. So I'm doing that. I'm still releasing Happy, Funny, Amazing
nice.
episodes. So please, you know, listen to my podcast. And yeah, I think that's it for right now. I'm trying to
Awesome.
think. I'm probably forgetting something. I write on a podcast called Trailblazers. It's another documentary from the vaults, kind of led to. It's an American podcast hosted by Walter Isaacson. So I have some episodes from that coming out
Cool.
that I'm pretty proud of. So a variety of things. I'm sort of like everybody else, just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what I get.
Yeah, and that's just the way it is. That's a sign of the times. You just
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing
Take-
some shows for the Storytelling Toronto Storytelling Festival is coming up in May.
Oh, nice.
So I'm doing some. So if you look at the festival, you can find me there. But the biggest thing that I like to promote right now is my podcast because that is my dear love and my happy place.
Oh,
I have to
like
agree.
us.
Yeah,
Just like
Right.
us. That's right. That's right. We love it.
Well, that's
We love
great.
it. Well, awesome. 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 Okay.
So,
Well, I think we're gonna say adieu.
well, thank you
Because-
so much for
merci.
having me. This was a real pleasure. It was so nice to meet you both. I think this is great what you're doing. Much appreciated. Putting
Thank
some
you.
spotlight
We
on.
appreciate you being here. We know your time is precious,
Yes,
and we so appreciate you making the time for us.
Thank you so
absolutely.
much. Well,
Thank you,
it
Joanne,
was a
and
real
best
pleasure.
wishes for everything, continued success.
Thank
We'll
you.
hopefully see you on the circuit. We'll definitely continue following all your podcasts
Thank you.
and
And your socials.
promote you.
That's right.
Yay.
And we can mostly find you on Instagram, right?
Yeah, Instagram. Yes, Instagram. And I was going to say, I'm also on Facebook. Does anybody still do Facebook?
Facebook, yeah.
On Instagram, I'm on 2 places. So at Joanne O'Sullivan, that's sort of my more private account, but then also Happy, Funny, Amazing. So I put up pictures to go with the stories that my guests tell me. So that's a fun
Perfect.
place to sort of see the actual visuals from the podcast.
That's
Excellent.
great.
All right.
Yay.
Right.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was so fun.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.